upon a time, you know, Santa said, let's go, go, go to Portland, Oregon.
Hi, everybody, and happy James Lloyd Day. Today's James' birthday.
I know.
For some people, it's Pearl Harbor Day, but I like to call this International James Lloyd Day. And I'm sure at some time or another, he may or may not, he might see this. But at any rate, hi, James, happy birthday. Usually we'd be walking to death right now, but we're going to be talking a little bit more about well, I said more, but we're not going to talk more about Joseph. What are we talking about today? I have no idea.
It's good to get to be here with you guys. I love that song. Are they hearing the song, the Christmas song?
I think as the intro, they are. That's the intention.
I love your voice.
No,
When Steve's voice, and of course he wrote the song, and I love the song. But anyway, it's really nice to hear your voice singing. Everything's going to be all right. I like that. But
everything is going to be all right.
Everything is going to be all right.
Don't know what'll happen between now and then, but it's going to be all right.
Yeah. But well, I know that yesterday we mentioned about the women that are in the genealogy of Jesus. And of course, there's a lot of fascinating men as well in the genealogy. But it's just peculiar that Matthew mentioned these women. Usually women were not mentioned in genealogies, but every once in a while, but there was usually a reason why they were, if they were mentioned. And of course, with every name that's listed in genealogy, there was also a mother, not just a father. And so, but he chose which ones to mention. And the fact that he chose to mention, Tamar and Rahab and Ruth and Bathsheba is just an interesting thing. Of course, Mary is in there as well, there at the end. But I was thinking that maybe we could just talk some about each one of these and what we learn from them, and maybe possibly even why they were mentioned, like what lesson we get from them being mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus.
Okay, that'd be great. You could start with Tamar,
yeah,
who of course was someone that just was willing to stoop to anything to get what she wanted, right? That's the story of Tamar.
Oh my gosh.
Is that the story? She did
Oh
something really awful and tricked a son of God, a son of Abraham. Have I got the story right?
No, not at all. But you know that. I mean, I think that, but it's like these women, it's very interesting. Women in the Bible very often are sexualized and demonized. And it's often not justified really at all. And you don't see that as often with the men characters in the Bible. And I think that we've got to examine sort of the actual stories and learn, because I know that Tamar was particularly thought to be, like you said, tricked, like she tricked Judah, or she deceived him. And so she's the deceiver. And what happens a lot of times, I think, since Eve, since the garden, since the whole debacle sort of that went on, there has come into different times in history, a little bit more so than others, this idea that women are temptresses, that women are not to be completely trusted, that they don't have as strong a moral fiber very often, and that men should beware or be careful, don't trust them too much. And even it comes into the women, being taught to don't trust yourself too much. And so there's been a lot of damage with a lot of those kind of stereotypes.
Well, and would you say it's because of the way we've read scriptures, or couldn't it have been a little bit more clear?
I think a lot of it is the way we read scriptures. I think that there was a presupposition. We all have bias. There's no such thing as a person that has no bias. So the thing we have to do is just accept our bias, acknowledge it, and then read the Bible knowing we have it and trying to sort of counterbalance it.
But one of the problems with bias is very often when we acknowledge we've got a bias, we may still be blind to something we don't consider a bias.
Right.
We consider it, but that's just the truth.
Exactly.
I'll acknowledge I'm biased. I believe the Bible.
Right.
But
yeah.
in the way I look, so okay.
But and that is very true. But I think in that there remains, if we acknowledge bias, hopefully that's accompanied by a humility that says when somebody points something out or we hear something different, we're more open-hearted to it, more open-minded. Like Joseph, we talked about yesterday about how he was very humble and he didn't have to be the center of everything, or maybe what he thought about all of it. He didn't insert what he thought, which is interesting. But I think that if we go through these women, we might learn some different things. Now, I don't know that today we have time to really do the lesson of Tamar.
And I told you I was going to share a link of a lesson that you did. I'm gonna share it a couple of times if this is still queued up right. Yeah, there we go. This is tell them a little bit about this lesson that you did some time ago.
I think this is about 5 or 6. I don't know. This is years ago, several years ago. And, we all grow. So I don't know that I would say exactly the same thing the same way in some of the point and the ideas or whatever. But I think that it is a lesson that goes through the story.
You stand pretty much behind it.
Yes. I mean, the basic of it, yes. I think that I get less sure the older I get. So it's very funny. Now, the way I would probably say some of the things is, I think this is the, instead of this is the. So I think that, which I think is healthy for me. I think the older I get, the more I recognize that there's more to learn and that I've always got more to learn. And I feel good about that. I don't feel like I have to know everything or have all the answers anyway.
Well, I think maybe just finding, start with a story, start with something that you have just accepted to mean something your whole life, and then let it unravel a little bit. And you start realizing, well, maybe this doesn't mean what I thought it meant. Yeah. I've got a few sayings I'm fond of telling myself just to remind myself where I first learned the Bible, who I first learned the Bible from. There are some things that I think I should respect and be encouraged about who I learned the Bible from. There's some other things I've got to take it with a grain of salt or less, because it's not just a matter of me reading it differently today. There are things that I clearly read wrong for the longest, for way too long.
Yeah.
So I think that you, and you didn't start with Tamar. I don't know if you can even remember the first thing that you started with that sort of got you to begin looking at the Bible differently. Do you remember? I know the subjects, but I don't know if there was something in particular. I know what it was for me, but
yeah, I think that honestly, I think it was slavery. I think that I started. Now, I think there were several things that came up, several subjects and topics as I studied and I started rethinking. But I think that a big turning point for me was the slavery and how it seemed to be listed in each one of the household codes. And I started to rethink, why was it there and why do we think what we think about slavery, but yet we don't read the whole passage in that context. And we look at part of the passage one way and another part the other way. And so I started questioning some of that, and I had some good conversations with some people that challenged me. And I was like, sticking to my guns sort of about what I had always taught. And then I had to go back and think about it. And so I think that's where it started with me.
On another time, when we're not getting ready for Christmas, I'll share some of mine. But what I've done is I've shared a lesson that Lisa did on tomorrow. That's pretty exhaustive. I didn't say exhausting, but it is pretty long.
It is
And
exhaustive.
it's good, but it's good. And I'm not just saying that because you're sitting close to me. It's a really good lesson. And even if there's things that you might say differently or not agree with now, I think if these are things you've never heard before, folks out there, then check it out. But so there's the long lesson on tomorrow. Let's talk about just sort of a little lead into tomorrow.
Yeah. And I think that's great. And also, I don't think there's anything in the lesson I wouldn't agree with. I do agree with all of what you're going to hear if you listen to that lesson. It's the way I would say it would be a little different.
Okay.
And so just so you know, I think, we all grow and keep learning, but how to communicate. But I think that the idea of tomorrow, like if you go to...
Can I set this up for you?
Sure.
This is in Genesis. Where are you going to start?
Well, I was just going to mention that it's like there at the beginning, it says what it says: Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. But that's the first woman listed in Matthew's telling of the Jesus, where he came from.
And what have you got open to that
No.
account? So then you're going back to Genesis. Well,
Genesis 38.
I would just say that this is one of those stories that either was complicated or confusing to me as a young preacher, difficult to talk, or I just outright concluded here's an example of someone that did something very wrong, but it must have worked out good because she ended up in the genealogy of Jesus. But she dresses up like a prostitute. She tricks Judah. And
well, I think that yeah. That's not really.
Wait, what did I say that's wrong?
Well, let's just start a little before that. In the actual story that messes up her reputation, okay, in that account, there's been a misunderstanding. I think several misunderstandings for a long time. Now, to be honest, I think we all get culture shock anytime we go into these stories in Genesis, and sometimes in the Old Testament, especially New Testament as well. But it's these ancient cultures are just so different from anything we can fathom or relate to that it's hard. And so we have to kind of, switch a part of us off, have to focus and be like, okay, this is a different world we're walking into. Like the Levite law, like all the things about, if your husband dies, then you're given to his brother and you need to marry his brother, sleep with his brother, and have a child or a son that then belongs to the dead husband and his line and gets his inheritance. And so
keeps his name alive.
Yes, keeps his name alive. And so, but there's all these kind of things that are hard for us to really picture, I think, and imagine and figure out how important they were to the people then at the time. And of course, being extinct was their greatest fear, was becoming extinct, their family line becoming extinct.
This gets into a lot of things. This gets into what people in those days actually believed about the afterlife, what they thought about heaven and hell. And a lot of the mistakes I've made in my theology has been to kind of assimilate these Old Testament stories into, well, what would it be like today?
Yeah.
And it's so different. It's such a different world that if you don't start figuring that out, then there's a lot of things that will look strange and weird.
Well,
but is it true? She does dress up like a prostitute and trick Judah, right?
Doesn't she? I'm not going to take the bait. Well, I think that there. So we go to Judah. I mean, and I think that the truth is, it's hard to tell this story There's this part 2 to this lesson that you posted. And so I might get you to post that later, because it's hard to not, we zoom in and we read the story. But if you don't sort of pull away from, like pull the camera back and see the bigger story, it's hard. Judah had just been a part of one of the worst things ever recorded in the Bible, and selling his brother his younger brother into slavery.
Well, that's an interesting thing in and of itself, isn't it? Where this story falls in Genesis.
Exactly. It is inserted in the middle of Joseph's
Of the Joseph story.
Of Joseph
Mhm.
Of the Joseph story, and Joseph being sold into slavery, and then and so it's inserted in the middle. And I really believe this is because Judah is a big part. I mean, Jesus was supposed to be the from the line of Judah, Lion of Judah. Judah was fourth of the brothers,
Mhm.
and not the primogenitor, not the firstborn, but Jesus, the Messiah, was supposed to come through him. And so he reacts, and we don't know if that had anything to do, if he even recognized or knew much about any of that, how spiritual he was. But I think that he really, at that time, like the story begins with, in chapter 38, Judah's actual story with Tamar begins at that time Judah left.
Mhm.
And so you have to look back and say, at what time? And that's what had just happened, this horrific thing.
So let the camera show the caravan has taken the captive Joseph off with them. They're leaving. Close up of the wide shot of the brothers standing there going, yeah, I guess we didn't. They sort of start going their separate ways. Close up of Judah. What have I done?
What have I done? And he runs. He leaves. And all of us can relate to just doing something, being a part of something that maybe you just feel so devastatingly guilty about that you want to isolate or run away. And it says that he leaves and he goes down, and basically he goes down and he just goes away from the family, which didn't happen that much at that time, as far as just, it's an odd timing for that to happen.
And drinks a lot.
And marries a Canaanite woman just like that. I mean, as far as the story is, it's like he runs off. He's not being his best self. He's not. And to marry a Canaanite woman means it sort of tells a story of how far he had sunk out of, like, where he was spiritually. Now, not that the Canaanite women were that awful. Our interaction with them actually is pretty good in the Bible. But as far as his belief, he believed that was like anathema. That was terrible. He was definitely not supposed to do something like that.
Am I spoiling it to say that those four women, they're all what?
Well,
am I getting ahead?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of things. There are several things.
We have a very in, out, lost, saved, black, white, Christian, non-Christian. We have the Canaanites. These were the this is just the evolving of what would become Israel, what would become the Jewish nation, right?
Right.
And so for him to marry, but he did drink a lot, right?
Okay. Show me.
Huh? Oh, I think I can.
Good.
But go ahead. I think you'll read it yourself if you
yeah. I mean,
if you stay in that book.
I think that the thing, there's, like I said, this story to me is one of the richest stories in the Bible. Now, many are this detailed. If you get into the details, it's an incredible story. So I hope that you'll read it and study it. And I think that the lesson that Steve posted, and I'll get him to do part 2 maybe later, but it just comes alive if you allow it to, and you can see this young woman and what she's gone through. So Judah runs, he marries a Canaanite woman. He then, she has 3 boys, so he has 3 sons. He goes and looks for a wife for his oldest son. And in different stories in Genesis, you see them going far away to make sure that they get someone that's a part of the people of God, that's an Israelite, for their son to marry. Okay, not Judah at all. It's like, I believe he's in a very dark place. And he's like just bought into all of it. And of course, part of the Canaanite culture, didn't the Canaanite culture have something to do, like the god of Molech, like the child sacrifices? They offer child sacrifices, I think.
In Gehenna, right there in the valley of Gehenna.
Okay. Well, I just know that this is a rough time and a rough sort of, it seems dark where he's at. And he goes and gets a Canaanite young woman to marry his eldest. And the Bible just says that she marries him and then he dies because he's so wicked.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody's gone, Judah's gone to get her and given her to this man that is so wicked that God intervenes and ends him.
Mm-hmm.
So I cannot imagine what that would have been like for this young woman to have been given to this man that's that wicked. And but then because he died, then the Levirate law says that then she's supposed to marry the next brother. So Judah gives her to the next one, and he refuses to allow her to get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has sex with her, but he tries to make sure that she doesn't get pregnant, that she can't bear a child. And there's a lot of financial, interesting stuff that goes into that, and his greed, because if she gets pregnant with a boy child, then he would have to split. He would get less inheritance, bottom line. I mean, it's more complicated than that. Actually, that child would get the primogenitor, the firstborn son's inheritance, which was half, instead of what he would be getting, which was a fourth. And so he's just not willing to do that. Well, he ends up dying because he's so wicked. So now this Tamar, we get this picture that she has been given to this wicked man. Then she's been given to this next man that abused her. Sexually abused is what it sounds like, a sexual abuse and emotional abuse. I mean, it was so important for women to get pregnant that to put her through this, it was probably very humiliating too. I mean, there's just this awful story. She's in this terrible situation. And of course, then he drops dead too. So now Judah does not want to give her his third son.
Bad luck.
Well, the Bible says, the Bible says that he was afraid. Mm-hmm. He was afraid that the third one would die too if he gave Tamar to this third son, mm-hmm. to Sheila. And so he doesn't want to do it. And so he tells her to go to her father's house and wait, to be a widow, to live as a widow, and to go to her father's house and wait to marry Sheila, his youngest. And it's interesting because that he could have just evidently let her go, set her free, but instead he keeps her under his complete authority, but living in her father's home with no prospects.
Stuck.
She's stuck.
She's stuck.
She's absolutely stuck,
but she's property to begin with.
Disrespected as she is. She's property.
Women were just, they didn't, husband and wife are two words that you don't find in the Hebrew Old Testament.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, but I know that it was a terrible situation in any culture, but particularly this culture, mm-hmm. to have been this abused and misused and used and neglected. And now she's just set aside. like and forgotten. And she's definitely somebody, the word we would use today is marginalized. Like she's totally been just set aside and marginalized, and she has no power, no say. She's under Judah's complete authority.
Truly without a voice.
Truly without a voice, which is the Hebrew word for widow is voiceless, without a voice. And she had nothing, none. But up until this point in the story, she really seems, everything we've read is she seems very compliant, very willing to just go and do. There's no record of her objecting or even being sad or mad. Like
that's about to change.
Well, it's like she seems very compliant. And then Sheila grows up. Okay, so Sheila, the Bible's very specific. Sheila grows up.
Let's say Shalah, just to.
Shalah. Okay, I don't know how to say any of the names. Is the truth, but I think that the youngest, he does grow up, and Judah does not give. In fact, some of the translations say that he deceived her when he said, "Go and wait," that he really didn't intend to give her to this youngest.
My money's on that.
And so it happens, but you don't hear anything from her. She's quiet. Her story's quiet until after this youngest has grown up, and it is very clear that Judah has not honored his word, his commitment, his responsibility. And so there's a lot that goes on there. It's like Judah's, I guess his wife dies and he's in mourning, and she hears about that. And she knows that, and she waits until he's out of mourning. But she begins to realize that Sheila's grown up, that Shelah, whoever, is grown up, and that Judah is not doing what's right, because this family is going to, like his first two sons, their lines are going to be gone. And so
if she doesn't do something, her husband's name will be exterminated.
Exactly. Two of them. And that's two of his sons. And she lived in Judah's house long enough. I believe she knew him. And she could predict sort of what he was like. And she knew probably the stories of his God. We don't know if she had faith at this point. Like, we don't know. But we know that she knew Judah. She knew him pretty well, enough to predict where to be and what to do. And we have to remember that in Judah's life, maybe this isn't the time, but I think that Judah is still seemingly in this dark place. And so it says that when she heard that he was going to have his sheep sheared, that he was going to take this trip up, I guess that partly meant that he was out of mourning. And it says that she takes off her widow's clothes and she dresses to cover her face. And so she dresses in a costume like that will cover her face. And she goes and sits at the temple, at the gate, and waits. And
which she's dressed how and sitting where? What was?
Well, the townspeople said there were no prostitutes there. When he goes back looking, there's no prostitute. They don't know what he's talking about. So it wasn't a common thing, evidently. And so,
but it must have been some sign to him. I mean, for him to see.
She knew
what
what he would think, I guess. And so, but she doesn't approach him. She sits. She just covers her face in this costume and sits and waits on him. And sure enough, he comes up to her and says, "I want to have sex with you." And she then says, "What will you give me?" And he says, "A goat." And he went to get the sheep sheared. So I don't know why he didn't just give her a sheep. Anyway, whatever. But he says a goat. And so she says, "Well, what will you give me until you get the goat?" And he said, what do you want? Basically, I mean, and she says, I want your cord, your seal, and the staff you have in your hand.
What's your credit card and driver's license?
Oh, more than that. I want your DNA and your passport. I want your passport and your DNA, and I want absolute proof for their day and time. That was it. Because the cord is what they use to hang their seal on, which is how they proved who they were. Like they would seal a letter or a missive, like a thing, and their staff was it was carved in such a way it proved their authority, who they were, and their authority. It was very personal, and so she says, he says, okay, yeah, you can have my cord, my seal, and my staff. Okay, so maybe he's not very bright. I don't know.
He's wanting sex.
Exactly. So he's lost his mind. So, but she knew him, and the truth is, most of us have known men like him. At some point in our life, we've known somebody we could predict that well in a given situation. And anyway, I just think that she knew him. She'd lived with him. She'd been married to 2 of his sons. And so she has sex with him. And then it says, right then, she takes off the costume and puts on her widow's clothes and goes home. Like it's very clear. She didn't sleep with anybody else. She wasn't a prostitute. She didn't plan to be. She got Judah to do what Judah was supposed to do. It needed to be a seed from his line. It could be his. It's years later before evidently there's any kind of law against sleeping with your daughter-in-law. I don't know. You ought to check that out. No. But at this point, there was no, it needed to be a seed of Judah in order to further this line. And you think about it, I mean, this woman is, for the first time, it's like she hears, she gets it, she realizes what he's not doing. And so she does what needs to be done. She goes from this fairly passive young woman, it seems, to a woman of action, where she's like, no, this isn't right. It will not stand. I will do something. And if he won't do what's right, then I will do what's right. And she steps up and she does this, and then she goes back home. So she puts back on her widow's garb and goes back home to her father's house and stays there. Judah hears that she's pregnant. Months later, obviously, he hears that she's pregnant, and he says, bring her out and burn her to death. So this is a very interesting, we get a little window into Judah's heart and soul. Now, he slept with what he thought was a prostitute. So there's this huge double standard going on as far as sexually.
Yeah.
And he doesn't seems like, yeah. And so, but I pictured this almost like a movie, as far as he orders her to be burned to death. She sends a messenger with the staff and the cord and the seal and says, give this to Judah and tell him that the father of my child owns these. The person that owns these is the father of my child. And it's almost like you could imagine that you're like, which is going to happen first? I hope he gets there in time. I hope the missive gets there in time. What's he going to do? Now, she could have just started ranting and raving and telling everybody, telling her dad, telling all the town. She could have shown it all and said, this is Judah's child.
She's thought this out.
Oh, right. That's what I mean, is she's clever, but also there seems to be, I don't know, she could have done this because she was angry, resentful. If you look at the motives, angry, resentful, and wanted revenge. Or she could have done it because she wanted a baby. I mean, didn't want to be alone. or she could have done it because of a sense of this is just the right thing to do. This is what's supposed to happen. And maybe it's a combination.
Well, finish the story and let's come
Okay.
back to that.
Okay.
I've got a question for you, but finish the story.
Okay. And so it gets there, the seal, the cord, and the staff gets there, and Judah looks and here's the message.
And we can all hear the music in this movie,
Oh,
right?
my
We can all
gosh.
see the camera where we can see the focus on his eyes.
Oh, wait. I should have gotten this ready earlier. But and what he says is, she is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her my son Sheila. So he took her as his wife, but he never slept with her again. He respected her for what she'd done. Now, this idea of righteous is very interesting. He calls her righteous. In some of the versions, it's like in the ERV, he said, she is right and I was wrong. In another version, it says, she is not guilty, I am. In another translation, it says, she is in the right and I have failed my obligations. Another, she is in the right and I am in the wrong. And another one, it says, she is not guilty, I am. So of those Hebrew words, that's how many different ways it was translated when people would take that Hebrew word and put it into English. And but it's clear. What he's saying is, this is all my fault. She is righteous and I'm not. And he wouldn't have used that term righteous if it was all about revenge or all about hatred or wanting to get him. I think that there's a sense of doing what's right that is higher, in that term righteous.
Would you say a sense of he's been called out?
He's been called out and he humbled out. He had all the authority though. See, and this is very clear. Like when he heard that, he ordered her death. Like her entire existence, like he had complete authority over her. And so he could have just said, kill her anyway, or he had the authority. But he, at that moment, I really believe Judah came to face with who he was and how dark he had become and how he had just given up on everything in life and just gone sort of he'd left his God's ways behind. And from that day on, you can see such a stark difference in Judah's life. Like it's interesting even how he interacted with Joseph before this and after this event. He is self-sacrificing. He sacrifices himself. He does everything. There's this sense of kindness and love and loyalty. He's just this different person. And it makes me think of the term that you and I talked about in Genesis with Azer Conegdo. They're in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, in that story there.
How so?
Well, the word Azer is a rescuer. It's very often used for God, but then that's what God called, woman.
Okay.
I'm going to make an Azer. I think that God used, Tamar to rescue Judah.
I see.
I think that Judah got rescued, and I think there's such a beauty in that. Now that this story, all the stories in the Bible are not really about people, they're about God, right? So this is really about how God works.
Well, could I interject something here?
Sure.
Because this is one of the things that got me to humble out and to realize I was just wrong about so much. This is one of the stories. Barak is another one. And one of the clues for me was I looked at the story of Barak and Deborah.
Yeah.
Didn't sound right, but it was Deborah, the judge. I looked at that story as Israel was so pitiful that they had to get a woman to lead them. There wasn't a man found anywhere. And I looked at Barak as someone, and even the things that she said to him, reading in English, not that I can read another language, but reading it with my presuppositions, it looked like Barak was someone. She says, "All right, but because you've come to a woman, the victory is going to be given," and that's not really what happens. And a clue to me was, wait, Barak is listed in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews, and so however I'm looking at him as this puny, weak, whipped guy, he's one of the heroes in history with people that were in the know. Tamar, this is your point. I'm stealing your thunder, but just to, I mean, as far as we know, this is the first Tamar. This is the first time we see that name in the Bible is here with her. But later we see what?
It's okay. You can say.
Well, no, now I forgot.
David
And Absalom, right?
named his daughter Tamar, and then David's son Absalom named his daughter Tamar.
So,
and they didn't name their children lightly. When they named their children, very often they were looking for something that would be inspiring.
Well, Absalom might have had two reasons to name his daughter Tamar, because he loved his sister. But the fact that name ends up in David's household. So Barak is in the Hall of Faith. Tamar is someone whose name is honorable. And I've grown up my whole life hearing she acted like a prostitute to trick her father-in-law, as if Judah was the good poor guy that got deceived. And what does this story mean? But it makes me want to ask you this question though. This little Canaanite woman gets dragged into this super dysfunctional family.
Yeah.
And her first husband is a bad man, so bad. But she wants to carry on his name. Why?
Well, I think that she understood that this was Judah's line, that Judah, if these sons didn't carry on, then Judah would be extinct. Judah would go away. And I think that she knew that enough of the story.
Well, and let me stop you
and
right there.
And I don't mean that she knew there was a Messiah coming.
Let me stop you right there just to say this is one of the reasons why it is so, you get yourself in such a precarious situation. If this doesn't make sense to you because of how we live today or how we think today, then welcome to the club. It's not even that the way they thought about it was necessarily that's in that time. It was apparently very sensical, and so much so that she knew this family, they're not doing what they're supposed to do,
and what all families are supposed to do.
So she sees to it. So with each of these women, I mean, Rahab, I mean, the in the genealogy.
Yeah, we'll do her next. Yeah, we'll do Rahab next.
But they all.
Well, that one of the things let me mention here is that Tamar is mentioned in Ruth's story, but as a blessing. That may you be as as Tamar, like, and
so wrap this up and bring it down to Christmas.
Well, I think that this genealogy, like looking at why did Matthew choose these women to focus, these moms to put in the genealogy? I think that he wanted to get us to notice them, to think about them, and to maybe say, hey, the Messiah came for everybody. We're all included. We're all welcome. He didn't come just for the Jewish people, the Jewish nation. He came for everyone. He didn't come for those that are just, very, whatever.
Salvador Mundi.
Wonderful, but people that have gone through a lot of terrible things, horrible things, hard things. I think that so many of us can relate to Tamar in different ways. like whether it's the abuse or the neglect or the being used or the being mistreated, or even just a reputation that has gotten bad. Like there's so much that we can look at her story and see how she could have given up. She could have just faded away. That she instead did something, made a difference. God used a situation and used her sort of gumption to make a difference.
And something you said a while ago, and maybe the change in spirit and manner, everything we see in Judah as the story goes on. When we get back to the story of him going to see his brother, and he doesn't know it's his brother, and his brother wants him to go get the youngest son, and you see a whole different Judah interacting.
Yeah,
right there.
He is transformed, like right before our eyes after this story. And of course, Tamar's story is just poked right in the middle of that story. So I love that. And I think that, I don't know, I had a woman tell me one time that when we did these lessons on Tamar, and she recognized, she was like, if I could have been, and she was a real Bible student, she said, if I could have been this wrong this long about Tamar and this story, there's no telling what else I could be wrong about. And I think that that is a good takeaway, in a sense that we just keep learning, and it's good stuff we're learning. And I think we can apply it, and we can see the world a little differently.
It should keep us humble.
Yeah.
Well, the longer version of this, like I said, there's a link there, and you can see that. Is this time to wrap up now for this one?
Yes. I just think that Jesus, I think coming up to Christmas, it's exciting to think about these things, because this is the way Matthew decided to tell the story. And so I think that's good for us to realize, that this is it was planned by God. Like a lot of things work together for lots and lots of years to make it happen.
Well, there you have it. And hopefully, Lord willing, we'll come back next week and we'll look at a couple of these other sisters in the Bible.
Yeah.
And we'll do that then. But thank you, those of you who can join us. And I continue to thank you for your prayers for this one. She's doing well. And we're so thankful and so blessed. So have a great weekend. And I like this tree blowing in the wind.